Please join me in welcoming Daniel Jimenez. Dan Jimenez is the Chief Operating Officer of Chatbooks, the easiest way to make amazing photo books right from your phone. Since joining Chatbooks in 2015, Dan has helped the business scale revenue 30x while growing the team and fulfilling orders to 45 countries worldwide. Prior to his current role as COO, Dan led the raise of $25 million of venture financing as Chatbooks CFO. Previously, he was an associate at Peterson Partners, a Utah-based private equity and venture capital fund. Dan was a vehicle dynamics engineer at Ford Racing, where he was part of winning 2 NASCAR championships and 33 race wins, including the 2012 Daytona 500. Here to speak about how to achieve sustainable growth in consumer business is Daniel Jimenez.
Hi everybody, my name is Dan Jimenez. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at Chatbooks, a consumer tech company based here in Utah, and I'm excited to be here, part of the Business Growth Summit, and to present on this topic of how to achieve sustainable growth in consumer businesses. This is a topic that's near and dear to my heart. Chatbooks is a consumer business. We sell photo books and other printed photo products direct to consumers through our app and website. And over the last 5 to 6 years that we've been scaling Chatbooks, there's been a lot of unique challenges we've been able to encounter and lessons that we've taken away from it, as well as having the ability to look at other businesses in the consumer market to see what they're doing to address the challenges that we've faced. And so my goal with today's presentation is to walk you through some of those. We're going to get kind of nitty gritty. It might feel a little bit like a college class. So hopefully we can keep your attention and you can take something away from today to be able to apply in your own business. So 3 high-level takeaways today. First, we're going to talk about how to calculate and track the unit economics of a consumer business. Secondly, how the unique challenges of retention for consumer businesses is what ultimately dictates the long-term growth of a consumer business. And then lastly, how the lifetime value dynamics in consumer products affect their cash flow and the different financing strategies that you can have for your business. And so hopefully when we get to the end, all of this makes a lot more sense and you'll have taken away something. So we're going to dive right into unit economics. So thought we'd start off with a few definitions. I'm sure a lot of this is already known, but to get all of us on the same page, I thought I'd just jump through 4 quick definitions of terms that we're going to use throughout the presentation today. The first, customer lifetime value, we're all familiar with. One point I wanted to make, customer lifetime value should be calculated on a gross profit basis after all of your cost of goods sold. So gross profit you collect from your customer over the course of their entire life, that is your LTV. Secondly, customer acquisition costs. So these are all the costs that are directly related to acquiring a new customer. Now, customer acquisition costs and how you calculate it and what's included can vary widely depending on the type of business that you are. For consumer businesses, that often includes ad spend and agency fees, as well as the personnel and overhead costs of their marketing team. So if you don't know exactly what to include in your CAC, I would suggest talking to other businesses that are like yours. Another great resource are analysts of public companies that are similar to yours that play in your category, or investors that see a lot of businesses like yours. They'll have a better idea of what you should include in your CAC and what you don't need to include. So thirdly, LTV to CAC. The LTV to CAC ratio is how much of the original acquisition cost are we able to recoup from the customer over the course of their life. An example would be a customer with a $100 LTV, but it took us $50 in acquisition cost to acquire them, would be a 2x LTV to CAC. And towards the end of the presentation, we'll get more into what is a good LTV to CAC ratio and what does that mean for financing your business. Lastly, before moving on to that, LTV to CAC ratio is really good for determining the long-term profitability of a business, but it's really hard to know early on. If you're just starting out and your startup is 1 or 2 years old, I would venture to guess it's very hard to know with a high level of certainty what your LTV is actually going to be, because customer lifetimes can be really long. From what I've seen, most businesses overestimate their LTV early on. They'll see the first 6 months or first 12 months of data of the customers they're acquiring and extrapolate that out to 4 years and say, oh, that's what my customer lifetime value is going to be. But there's dynamics that need to be taken into consideration, like the earliest customers are usually the best customers. So as you go on acquiring new cohorts of customers, they're usually going to get less and less valuable or lesser quality. So LTV to CAC is a good ratio to use once you have, I think, a substantial amount of data. So another way to look at unit economics is CAC payback period, which is the time that it takes to pay off your CAC, usually measured in months. And that metric determines your short-term cash flow. And it's easy to measure on because within 3 or 4, or within 12 months, hopefully, if you've paid a customer off or not. And that is, I think, a better metric for driving how much should I be spending, how much should I be willing to pay for a customer. So moving on, we're going to go through a couple of examples. I've come up with 3 made-up companies that we're going to use to illustrate how LTV dynamics can be different. So the first one we're going to call Streamflix. Streamflix is a video streaming service. It's $20 a month, and it operates on a 67% gross margin basis. On the chart below, we've plotted the cumulative lifetime value and gross profit dollars for Streamflix. So you get $13 of gross profit from that customer in their first month, and $13 every month thereafter, and it grows nice and linearly. Secondly, we're going to have a company called Sleeper. So we're going to pretend this is a direct consumer mattress company that sells really cheap mattresses for $230 a piece at a 50% gross margin. So that's the red line in this chart, where in their initial month, in month 1, we sell them the mattress, we collect $115 in gross profit, and then we don't sell them anything else for a long time. They bought the mattress, they don't need one for a while. Then thirdly, we're going to have a company called Spin Club, which is a smart exercise bike that is sold for $200 a bike at a 25% gross margin, and then a bike class subscription fee every month for $15 a month to do a remote spinning class, and that's at 50% gross margin. So here we have the 3 different businesses plotted in cumulative revenue. We can see that they start out in very different places, but over time, by month 8.5, they've all accumulated the same amount of lifetime value out of their customers. And then from that point forward, they start to diverge a lot. So now looking at the customer acquisition costs of these 3 companies, let's pretend that all 3 of them have an $80 CAC. They each have to spend $80 to acquire a new customer, whether that's to sell them a mattress, sign them up for the streaming service, sell them a bike. Now, the initial gross profit that we're going to get out of every one of these customers is calculated below, described it in the slide previously. So we can think of that as what % of the acquisition costs have we recovered within that initial month. For Streamflix, that's only 16%. For Sleeper, it's more than 100%. We get 144% of our CAC in the first month because we sell them that big expensive mattress. Then thirdly, Spin Club is like 73% of that $80 CAC. We'll get into why this is really important in the next few slides, but one more term to throw at you is this concept of net CAC. So if we take our CAC and net out the gross profit we can get from that customer in their initial month, these are the dollars per customers we're actually having to finance ourselves. So for Streamflix and Spin Club, those are both positive, $67 for Streamflix, $22 for Spin Club. But for Sleeper, it's negative, so negative net CAC is great. That means we're able to collect more in gross profit than we actually paid to acquire them within the same month, and that is really helpful for short-term cash flow. So we can generate $35 in profit immediately out of the gate. So let's put back on this chart our 3 businesses and a dashed line for the $80 CAC that all of them have to acquire their customers. For Streamflix, they have a really low IOV, only $13, and so they're having to finance 84% of their acquisition costs in that initial month. That's a lot to make up for. And we look out 6 months and we see that it crosses that $80 CAC threshold. So we have a 6-month payback for Streamflix. For Sleeper, we're covering our initial acquisition costs with the initial order value, and we have essentially an immediate payback within their first month. And then lastly, for Spin Club, the 73% covered in the first month, and we get to that 100% covering the $80 of CAC by month 4. So putting all 3 of these on the chart at the same time, we can see Sleeper's immediate, Spin Club is a 4-month payback, and Streamflix is a 6-month payback. So why is this important? Really, it comes down to how efficient can you be with your sales and marketing budget? How many dollars can you turn within a given year to increase your budget given your unit economics? So I like to think of sales or acquisition spend efficiency in terms of turns of spend. So for Streamflix, it's a 6-month payback, which within 12 months, they're able to turn their money 2 times. Sleeper, they get it every month, so they're able to turn their money 12 times. And then Spin Club every 4 months, so they turn their money 3 times. So every time you can get an additional turn out of your unit economics, you're able to double your sales and marketing spend. So if all of these started off the year with a planned $1 million advertising budget, then Streamflix would actually be able to take that million and turn it into a $2 million budget. Sleeper would be able to turn it into a $12 million budget. Spin Club $3 million, so on. So I think it's really helpful to think of it that way. As you improve your unit economics, you're actually funding yourself, self-funding yourself with more cash to be able to acquire customers. So for this next section, we're going to jump into the importance of revenue retention, which I think is the biggest factor for determining your overall business growth. And at the end of this, we're going to see how differences in retention are actually determining top-line revenue growth for the business. So similar chart to before, but we've expanded the time horizon out to 48 months or 4 years. And instead of plotting gross profit dollars, we're plotting just overall revenue, because we're going to sum up to total company annual revenue at the end. So if we're then to look at it, how much revenue are we getting every individual year? We get a lot in year 1 because it includes, for all 3 of these businesses, because it includes this initial order value, the thing that we're selling them, the mattress or the smart bike in the case of Sleeper and Spin Club. But then when we get to year 2, we start to see a lot of revenue retention drop off. So for Sleeper, their revenue retention goes to 0. They've churned 100% of that revenue because they are not selling another mattress to that same customer in years 2, 3, or 4 in this example. Then for Spin Club, that revenue retention is dropping down to 47% because in years 2, 3, and 4, they don't have the bike to sell to the customer again, but they do have that monthly bike class fee that they're charging every month. And then for Streamflix, they are enjoying 100% revenue retention because what they charged in their first month is the same thing they're going to charge in month 48 to that customer. We're going to then look at, okay, year 1 revenue, and then we're going to build out year 2, year 3, year 4 for a particular cohort of customers. So for the 2020 cohort, let's pretend that all 3 of these businesses spend $1 million in ad spend. They have an $80 CAC. They get 12,500 customers. And you can see in the slides here what that translates into revenue in the initial year for each of these 3 businesses. All pretty close, 3 million, 2.8, 4.7, not wildly different. Now let's look at the cohort age and what the revenue retention is. All of them start out at 100% revenue retention in the first year, and then it starts to decay. Streamflix, it stays the same. Sleeper immediately goes to 0, and Spin Club goes down to 47%. We're going to assume it stays there. Building this into a cohort table, which is really helpful to do to understand how your business is going to grow, we have annual cohorts along the first column, or along the rows in the first column, and then we have what year, fiscal year, we're counting up the revenue in across the top. So we acquire a 2020 cohort for Streamflix, we get $3 million out of them their first year. Well, we get $3 million out of them their second year, and so on. And so this is a really nice business that just keeps adding $3 million to their top line every year, goes 100% year-over-year growth, 50%, 33%, and you would think that this should be a really good business, but it is hard to keep your annual growth rate stable for reasons we're about to see. Sleeper, on the other hand, they acquire a cohort in 2020 that gives them 2.8 million, but in 2021 and thereafter, they're not getting any money out of that customer again. So every year they're having to replace the revenue that they got the year before with their new cohort that they're acquiring. So year-over-year growth is completely flat. For Spin Club, it's a lot better than the mattress company, but not as good as the streaming company. It's somewhere in between. So 47 to 32 to 24% year-over-year growth. Now, let's look at what a typical retention path might look like for a consumer business. So in here we have 2 scenarios, scenario A and B. A is the one we just walked through where we hold it at 47% every single year. And then scenario B is let's actually let that kind of decay more naturally, where we go from 47% retention in year 2 down to 35, down to 25, down to 20%. So it's falling but flattening out. That's what I've seen in most consumer businesses that I've been able to have data access to. And this is really important because we'll see the differences in the revenue trajectory that the business is on for each scenario. So in scenario A, by the end of 2024, the Spin Club is at $13.8 million, growing 20% year over year. But Spin Club scenario B is only at $10.8 million, growing 10% year over year. Those are pretty wildly different businesses. One's growing twice as fast with $2 million more in revenue after 5 years. And the relative differences in revenue retention rates are really small. We can continue to look at that sensitivity and build out some more scenarios C and D, to the point where in scenario D, by the time they get to 5 years old, their growth is completely flat. Now, they're still spending $1 million a year in ad spend. Their ad budget is the same in year 5 as it was in year 1. Their unit economics in terms of their CAC and initial year value is still the same. Nothing's changed. The only thing is that they've gotten more and more cohorts. They've become a bigger business, but that revenue churn from the lack of retention is really starting to hurt, to the point where at 5 years out, they're completely flat. And we can see that here kind of in more detail in this chart, where the numbers in red are the amount of revenue that each cohort is losing due to churn every year into the future. And then the numbers in black are how much we're adding with the new spend for that new cohort we're getting each year. Look at year 5, so year 2024, Spin Club is churning $4.5 million in that year from all their prior year cohorts, but they're only adding $4.7 million. So they're netting $250,000 in annual growth of revenue because of their poor revenue retention. So you could try and add spend, you could try and improve your CAC, you could do a lot of things. It's not really going to address the core problem of growth, which is getting as much revenue out of your old cohorts as possible and retaining them and keeping them happy. So as we think about how does this affect the cash of the business and how should you think about it as an operator, let's look through an example where the monthly spend for each of these businesses is $100,000. Same CAC assumptions, same initial month value assumptions. But in Streamflix, they're burning $83K of revenue every single month that they acquire a new customer cohort. But Sleeper, they're generating cash, $43K every single month. And Spin Club, burning 27. If you looked at this chart, I think most business owners would look at that and say, I want Sleeper. Like, I want option number 2 because that is generating cash every month in the initial month of the customer's life. But that'd be a little bit of a short-sighted view. And so we need to look more over the long term to see how profitable this business is actually going to get. So if we stretch that out to 12 months, and not only looking at the initial month, but 12 months of a customer, we see the same $83K of burn for Streamflix, $28K of burn for Spin Club, but $43K of profit in the initial month for Sleeper. But that cash flow starts to compound, and we get our payback of 4 months for Spin Club and 6 months for Streamflix. And by the time we get to month 12, the most profitable business to be in is actually Streamflix, the one with the lowest average selling price. And it's all because of its high gross margin and its revenue retention dynamics. So if you're looking at this, now you have to ask yourself, which business do I want to be in? Streamflix is definitely the one to be in. Spin Club's a pretty decent option. Sleeper would be a terrible option. It'd be very hard to grow that business long term. So to summarize, let's put these all back on one chart and look at LTV to CAC. So the LTV to CAC of Sleeper is really poor. It's sub 2x. I would put that in the expensive growth category. It's going to take them continually increasing their ad budget in order to grow, rather than keeping their ad budget the same every year. They'll never grow top line revenue without increasing their ad spend. So businesses in this kind of 0 to 2x within 48 months, I would say are expensive growth, and these are businesses that their financing strategy should be self-funded. They should be trying to optimize for gross margins and being self-sufficient in their growth, because the unit economics just aren't there to be able to invest long-term into growth. Now, the next bucket is kind of between this 2 to 5x LTV to CAC. I would call this the efficient growth group. So this is when it starts to make sense to consider raising capital, whether that's debt or whether that's equity, for your business to fuel growth, because you know you're going to get that payback in spades later on, and you can justify burning cash every month, knowing that you're building cohorts that are going to retain and be healthy and drive value long-term for your business. And then thirdly, the best category to be in, 5x LTV or more within 4 years, I would say high growth. These are the businesses that would fit a more traditional venture capital model. And I think, is what we would all strive to be. These businesses are really hard to come by, especially in consumer. LTV to CACs of 5x plus are very common in enterprise and B2B businesses, but in consumer, very rare to come by, usually driven more by extremely low customer acquisition costs through word of mouth and viral growth, and less by the LTV that they're getting out of the customer. Most of the consumer businesses that have high LTV to CAC ratios are just growing organically and very cheaply. Now, if you're in a consumer business that's enjoying that right now, hold on to it as long as you can. Most consumer businesses will start to slow down their word of mouth growth after a few years. And then that's when the paid acquisition starts to come into play, and when you have to really keep an eye on your unit economics to make sure you're not spending your way out of a CAC payback period that doesn't make sense. We looked at some of these examples that had a 4-month or a 6-month payback cycle. From what I've seen, the best consumer businesses are managing to between a 6 and 12-month payback cycle. If your payback cycle is longer than 12 months, you're spending too much on customer acquisition costs, and growth is going to be really hard to finance. All right, so in summary, hopefully this has made some sense. You've learned some stuff. Here, I think the 6 main takeaways that I would love for everyone to take home from this presentation is, number 1, the growth rate of a consumer business is ultimately determined by 2 primary drivers. Number 1 is revenue retention, and number 2 is gross margin. We didn't really dive into gross margin and the sensitivities around gross margin in this particular example, but I would say that there's maybe nothing more important than gross margin. So working on your cost of goods sold and getting that down as much as you can, there's nothing better you can do for the growth of your business. And we don't often think of as reducing expenses as a growth driver, but they definitely are. Secondly, decaying revenue retention starts to drag down top-line growth like a parachute the older that you get. So I've heard a lot of businesses that get, consumer businesses that get into year 4, year 5, and they've been growing triple, double year over year, and then they hit year 4 and 5, and growth just starts coming to a screeching halt. And that's because of this revenue retention issue, where you've been able to purchase large cohorts at a cheap acquisition cost early on because your product is new and novel and has word of mouth growth. And then now that's starting to slow down, and now you have to actually start spending for customers, but those old cohorts are starting to churn out, and you just start throwing up your hands wondering, what do you have to do to grow this business? It really comes down to revenue retention. So short-term cash flow, as a reminder, is driven primarily by the initial order value in that customer's first month, but the long-term growth of the business is driven primarily by that ongoing value that you're getting at month 24, month 36, month 38. The best consumer businesses, to summarize all of this together into one example, are the ones that utilize both the ongoing portion, or they have a large initial purchase, like the mattress, for example, but then they can couple that with an ongoing subscription. So 2 recent examples that recently went public or filed their S1s are Peloton versus Casper. I would, if you want to do some take-home work, definitely go read the summaries on Peloton versus Casper. But Peloton is kind of this perfect consumer business because they have the high initial order of selling the $2,000 bike at a pretty good margin, something like 50% margins, and then they've got the $40 class pass every month. And so they have been able to drive their growth very profitably because they've got the 2 dynamics going on. Lastly, a business's financing strategies is determined not only by its cash management cycle, can it generate cash every month, but more importantly, its long-term LTV to CAC. So this has been a very quick overview of unit economics, the importance of revenue retention and financing strategies. I'm happy to engage with anybody who might have any questions. You can find me on Twitter. Would love to chat with anyone who has ideas or questions, and thank you so much for coming to my presentation.